Is editing the missing step in your music? Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guide, Colin, and today we're talking about editing. Editing is crucial if you want your music to sound as good as possible, and it's something that all professional engineers do, but it's rarely talked about because it's kind of boring. It's not really exciting, and it's kind of hard to show. It's slow, it's a little bit monotonous, but it's crucial. It's really, really important if you want your music to sound as good as possible. When we're talking about editing, what we're really talking about is removing any distractions for the listener and tightening things up so that they're really in time with each other. Now, we don't need to go overboard with this. Some people critique the modern production era because everything can become really robotic and really exact and precise. That's not necessarily what I'm advocating for. You should always edit to the sound that you're going for. So some genres, really precise editing is important. A lot of hard rock, where there's really precise rhythms, those need to be really locked into each other. And it's important to still get the best take possible. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it still might need a little bit of editing to get it really, really time aligned as well as it needs to be for it to sound really tight and clean and professional. But then some other genres, looser genres, acoustic genres, singer-songwriter genres, they might not need to be locked into anything at all. It's okay if they're a little bit more free-flowing, right? So you need to edit to whatever the style is that you're working on. But you should lean into that, and you should not be afraid of editing because, while it kind of sounds like a dirty word to some people, it is a part of creating music, and there's nothing wrong with that. And also don't forget that editing includes things as simple as trimming out silence in areas that doesn't need to be there so we're not clouding up our mix with extraneous noise. The point is we need to be thinking of editing as a part of the process that we're always going to factor in, because it's going to go into any genre, no matter what music you're making, there's going to be some amount of editing in it. So up to you how much editing you need in your music, but get familiar with what editing is, the power of editing, and how you can do it. Again, we've talked about it on this channel, so go check out those videos as well. But for today, we're going to focus on the rules of editing so that you can really harness the power while not feeling overwhelmed or like you're missing anything in editing. So let's jump into the do's and don'ts of editing. Don't number one, don't plan to fix it with editing. You just can't think this way. As with everything in music, you always have to imagine the next step isn't there. That's the way I like to think about it. So record like there is no editing. You want to get the best performance possible because editing can only do so much. And if you're always thinking, well, I'll just fix that with editing, then you could be creating a bunch of little situations where editing couldn't quite actually fix it. And then music just sounds a little bit weird because it has all these little moments where things weren't quite right. So, do number one, get it right when you are recording. Editing works best when we're just making subtle, small little tweaks, adjusting things slightly in timing, getting things shifted exactly where they should be, but not making big, huge movements. It doesn't really work when we're doing that. You need to be thinking about editing as just tightening it up a little bit. So you always want to get the best possible take that you have in you, right? But once you have what's the best take that you know you're capable of, then any little adjustments, go ahead and make them with editing. Don't worry about it, but always get the best take that you have in you, and that will be enough. And worst case, if there's a day where you just don't have it in you, but you really want to get this part down, get down the best take that you have in that day and just be okay with that. And then if you can fix it in editing, fix it in editing. There are things that can be done in editing to really get something better. If you're not as good at bass, but you don't have access to another bass player, well, editing can really help you sound more professional. And it's something, again, that is happening all around the professional music industry. Believe it or not, there's a lot of pro drummers, a lot of pro bass players out there who aren't super tight in their timing. But when you hear them on a record, they sound really, really great. But that doesn't mean just go in and do a sloppy performance that's half-hearted and call it done. Still go for the best take possible. And when you feel like you've got that, then move on. Don't number two, don't edit everything. This is one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on. I would edit literally every single note played to be precisely on the grid. And that's not necessarily bad, but it wasn't necessarily necessary. And it was extremely time consuming. And sometimes it created edits that were a little bit weird because I was forcing the edit to make it happen, to make it right where it should be. And then I would have little weird transitions or little weird notes where things weren't working quite right because I was so fixated on making sure it was right on the grid that I missed the point of editing, which is just making it sound a little bit tighter and a little bit more natural. Now, again, some things have to be really, really, really tight, and that is something that you might have to battle with inside the genre that you're working on. But in general, you're not necessarily going for perfectly to the grid every single little beat. You're going for really tight and close together so that nothing sounds off or out of place. So how I learned to combat this brings me to do number 2, which is edit in sections and do as little as you can, but as much as you need to. This is a phrase I know you've heard me say on this channel many times. You want to always do as little as you can, but as much as you need to. Don't be afraid to edit every note if you can and you need to, because they're all just a little bit off and they need to be really locked in. But don't plan on doing that for every single section of every single part of every single instrument on the track. That's very likely not necessary. So if you have a part that's really, really precise in the song and everything should be hitting together and the bass is a little bit rushed and then he falls a little bit behind the beat when he's correcting and then he finally lands on the beat, then edit each of those notes to get them where they should be. But let's say you tend to just fall a little bit behind the beat. Well, as opposed to precisely putting every single note up to the beat, try taking that whole section and moving it just a little bit earlier and seeing if moving that whole section does what you need it to do. It's going to be a lot faster and it will often sound a little bit more natural. Which brings me to don't number 3, don't edit with your eyes. This really goes hand in hand with don't number 2, where I was editing everything to be precisely on the grid. I was doing that because I could see the grid and I could see how I might be slightly off from the grid with this hit, and I would just use my eyes to edit that, not even thinking to listen first. Sometimes those hits actually sound fine depending on the character of them. If it's a slow strum in, sometimes it should actually start kind of before the beat. Things like that that might look wrong are actually totally fine in the context of the mix. Which leads me into do number 3, listen first, then use editing to tighten up what jumps out at you. So I always use a combination of my eyes and my ears. I can often see in the waveform where things are happening relative to the beat, but I'm always listening and focusing on what I'm hearing over what I'm seeing, because ultimately it only matters how it sounds. No one's going to see what the waveform of your guitar track look like inside your session. They're only going to hear whether or not it sounds right. So focus on how it sounds, and if it sounds right, don't mess with it. If it sounds a little bit off and you're not exactly sure what's going on, use your eyes. This is one of the best parts of editing, which is that it kind of teaches you how to listen for when things are ahead or behind the beat. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. But for now, don't number 4, don't wait until the end to edit. Now, there's 2 reasons for this. The first is that depending on the size of your session, you could be creating a huge amount of work that you're going to have to do in one setting or a few sittings that's not really fun. As I mentioned at the beginning, editing's kind of monotonous. So if you save it all until the end, well, when are you going to want to sit down and do a bunch of editing in your session? It is kind of exciting as it starts to come together, but it often also is really boring. And so it's not something that we're going to run to do. So try to not wait and save all your editing for the end. But the second and maybe more important reason is because if we save all the editing till the end, well, let's say when we are playing guitar on this track, we rush a little bit, and then we track the next track and we're listening to the GarageBand drummer, the metronome that are both perfectly in time, but also that guitar track that's a little bit rushed. Our ears and our natural rhythms will sometimes start to match the thing that's rushing or falling behind. And overall, as we continue to build up, we will start to have more and more things that are just a little bit out of time, a little bit more. So what I often recommend is do number 4, edit as you go. This really has 3 benefits. First is that it allows you to record with everything kind of more locked into the groove, and so you're going to naturally be closer in your timing. 2, if things aren't quite coming together right in the editing phase, you can likely just fix it right then and get it right in the recording phase. So if you're recording guitars and you just didn't realize that you didn't play that part quite right, or you were a little bit too loose in your timing to edit it to be really spot on, If you go ahead and edit before you finish recording guitars, then you know, oh, that bridge was just a little bit too loose. Let me just retrack that really quickly now. And you can fix it in the recording phase, and then you don't have to worry about not being able to fix it in the editing phase at the end of this process. And then lastly, of course, it just means that you don't have a bunch of editing you have to do in one fell swoop that's really boring and monotonous, and you can make sure that everything is right as you're going. Now, I will say this is a rule I'm a little more apt to break depending on the situation. So if I'm recording other people and time is really of the essence and we just have to get through all this recording in a short amount of time, then I might break this rule. Or if things are really on a roll, I might push through and just keep the energy high and edit at the end. But especially sometimes if you're recording other people and it would be difficult to get them back, it's good to go ahead and edit as you go to make sure that everything worked before they leave, and we'd have to reschedule to get them back in, and a huge inconvenience. So try to edit as you go as much as possible, but if you need to break this rule, my permission, not that you need it, but my permission. Now, there's a sneaky, amazing thing about editing that if you're aware of, you can really leverage to improve much, much faster. And that's that editing teaches you a lot about the recording process. If you start editing to get things a little bit more in time, you start having a more discernible ear to really pick up on if things are a little bit ahead, a little bit behind the beat. And then you can start fixing those better in the recording phase, getting better recordings and not having to edit as much. So it's not uncommon to have to do more editing early on in your process. It often doesn't necessarily even hinder the actual tone or sound, but it is time consuming. But as you get better and as you improve and as you start to understand, oh, that's what it sounds when I'm a little bit late because I now know what that looks like and I've now fixed that after the fact. Now I can, okay, I'm just going to get a better take. I'm going to be a little bit more locked in on that timing. It really is a powerful tool for learning the recording process and getting a better understanding so that everything that you do from here on out is a little bit tighter, is a little bit more in time, and sounds a little bit more professional. You can edit less, things sound a little bit more natural, they come together better, and you'll improve as a musician, as a recording artist. Really, really cool. The benefits multiply, right? We just step up. Everything we do improves on the last thing, and we get better and we grow as we go. But while editing is important and it is crucial if you want your music to sound as good as possible, mixing is still a completely unskippable stage, if you will. You need to be mixing your music, and mixing is not as difficult or as intimidating as it sounds. At the end of the day, there's 6 steps that all professional mixes have, and you can do all of them inside GarageBand completely free. I've put together a free 6-step checklist that just walks through all 6 steps that all professional mixes have and how you can do them inside GarageBand. There's a link in the description below where you can go download it, again, completely free, so be sure to grab that. That's really going to help you out. If you're serious about making professional sounding music, then you have to be mixing it. And even if you eventually want to send your music off to be mixed by other people, learning to mix is going to help you understand what they're doing. It's going to help you send better mix notes. No matter what, learning to mix is going to benefit you and your music. So definitely be sure to grab that 6-step checklist. Again, it's completely free. It's really going to help you out. Before we go, I always want to hear from you. Do you edit? What process do you use for editing? Let us know in the comments below. If you don't edit, are you going to start editing now? Let me know. If this video was helpful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week with another video.
One thing at a time, I can